Well, so last summer, there were massive protests going on that were quite, I would say for Dutch standards, quite radical, quote unquote. And I don't mean that in a negative sense of the word, but just the fact that they went out in such fast numbers was something that we don't often see in our country. So for example, the word poldercultuur is very telling for who we are as a nation. That sort of signifies something like we're a nation of compromise, we're a nation of dialogue. One of our favorite sayings is like, oh, just behave normally, then you're already acting crazy enough. That is really typical for the Dutch. So to have all these Dutch farmers in the summer go out and protest, take their tractors onto the highway, for example, block the highway, block distribution centers, even go towards the airport and basically show our government who is boss, because that is really what they did. Within a day, we saw food shortages in the supermarket. So it really reminded people of the fact that farmers produce our food. They're not just businessmen, they produce our everyday nutrition for us. And they were really successful with those protests, a bit too successful. And then what happened was the Dutch state intervened. So they sent police forces, they sent actually the military to those protests. And at a certain point, they even started using violence and shot at a 16-year-old boy that was driving away from the protest. And mind you, these protests are completely peaceful. So we don't, obviously in the Netherlands, we don't have...
That shooting was on video from multiple angles. That boy didn't do anything.
That boy didn't do anything. He was 16 years old. He was on a tractor and he was driving away. That should not happen in a free Western country. And the fact that it did happen, and the fact that we don't have a First Amendment and we definitely don't have a Second Amendment, became very, very apparent to me. What do you do in that type of situation when you are dealing with a government that thinks that it can take away everything that you have ever worked for, everything that you have ever done in your entire life, just like this, because they create a crisis out of thin air and they say, you have to give up your rights, you have to give up your property, and we're just going to take your land. Because mind you, our farmers are not free to sell their land to the market. It has to go to the state. Well, after those protests in the summer where they shot at the boy and the protests became more and more heated, the mainstream media did exactly what our government wants it to do, and they started vilifying our farmers. And, they are trying to test the people's patience. So when things go on for too long, especially in the Netherlands, people get tired of it. The news cycle, they're like, oh, these farmers again. The government starts saying, we need to renegotiate. Like I said, the renegotiations never lead to anything. They just change the tune. But their hope is that people will get tired of it. And sadly, that was the case. So for a couple of months, after the Dutch farmers were worldwide news during the summer, we didn't hear anything from our farmers for the longest time. And there are a lot of farmers that are still, because, usually that is a good Dutch mindset, open to dialogue, open to negotiations, they were willing to sit around the table with our government again. And then when the new report came out and nothing changed, the mainstream media again started ramping it up. And I think a lot of people got afraid. They got fearful, a lot of farmers, that they had lost the support of the people. Because if they read what the mainstream papers write about them, then if I were them, I would also think that I had no support from the Dutch people anymore. But I think inherently, the opposite is true. I think if you ask most people on the street in Holland, do you think that this is right? They will say no. I don't think that is right.